A single dad, down on his luck, is forced to sleep in his car with his daughter until a mysterious billionaire woman knocks on the window and changes everything. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning sun filtered weakly through the faded blinds, casting pale stripes across the worn carpet. Daniel Brooks sat at the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, the crumpled notice trembling slightly in his calloused hands. The red letters at the top read, "Final Notice," bold and unfeeling. 30 days had come and gone, and now it was official. He and Lily had to be out by sundown. He rubbed a hand over his stubble-lined jaw and let out a slow breath. Rent had always been tight, but with the garage cutting his hours again, it had become a silent countdown, each unpaid bill a tick toward this moment. He'd hoped for a miracle, or maybe just more time, but neither had come. From the hallway, tiny footsteps approached, followed by the familiar creak of the floorboard outside the bedroom. Lily, still in her pajamas, peeked into the room, clutching her stuffed fox under one arm. "Dad?" she asked, blinking sleepily. "Are we having cereal today?" Daniel quickly folded the notice and slipped it between the cushions. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "Cereal sounds good." Lily padded across the room, hopping up onto the couch beside him. She rested her head against his arm, and for a brief moment Daniel closed his eyes. Her warmth, her trust, it anchored him in a way nothing else could. He couldn't let her see the fear, not yet. "I like when we have breakfast together," she murmured. "I do, too." They ate in silence, the clinking of spoons against ceramic bowls, the only sound. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had changed. Cars rolled by, birds chirped in defiance of the cold. But inside, everything felt fragile. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was a maze of half-filled boxes and bags. Daniel tried to keep things light for Lily's sake, letting her decorate one box with stickers and drawings. She thought they were going on an adventure. He couldn't bring himself to correct her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across their living room floor, Daniel stared at the front door. It was time. Time to walk out with their lives packed into a car that barely ran and no idea where they were headed next. Daniel's breath fogged in the cold air as he yanked open the trunk of his aging sedan, the hinges groaning in protest like they didn't want to open either. A battered duffel bag hit the floor with a dull thud, followed by a worn backpack and a grocery bag filled with pantry odds and ends. He moved quickly, not because there was a rush, but because if he slowed down, he might think too hard about what this moment meant, and he couldn't afford that. Inside the apartment, Lily danced from room to room, her tiny arms cradling stuffed animals like precious cargo. "Do Mr. Pickles and Peanut come too?" she asked, holding up a ragged bear and a giraffe missing one ear. Daniel managed a tight smile. "Of course they do. They're part of the crew." She nodded seriously and gently placed them in her princess-themed backpack, then zipped it up with care. "Okay, we're ready for the adventure." He turned away so she wouldn't see his face falter. Adventure. She thought this was some spontaneous road trip, a break from routine. He wanted to believe that too, for her sake. But every creak of the apartment as they emptied it felt like goodbye. Goodbye to the place Lily had learned to ride her scooter in the hallway. Goodbye to the kitchen where they made pancakes on Sundays, even when the mix was expired. Goodbye to the only roof they'd had since Rachel died. Daniel grabbed the last box, filled with photo frames and a tangle of charger cords, and carried it out to the car. The back seat was already stacked high, leaving just enough room for Lily to buckle in beside her backpack of plush friends. "Can I have the window seat?" she asked as she skipped out behind him. "You got it," he said, opening the door and helping her climb in. He did one last sweep of the apartment, standing in the middle of the empty living room where the echoes of their life still lingered. For a second, he just stood there, the silence pressing in. Then he closed the door, locked it, and didn't look back. The car sputtered to life as Daniel settled behind the wheel. He reached over and took Lily's small hand in his. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, beaming. "Let's go, Dad." And so they did, into the unknown, with everything they had packed in the back and everything they truly needed riding up front. The parking lot behind the old supermarket was half-lit and mostly forgotten, tucked between a shuttered hardware store and an empty laundromat with flickering neon. Daniel turned off the engine, and the sudden silence felt louder than the hum of the heater had been. The cold crept in quickly, pressing against the windows like a quiet reminder that this was now home. He glanced at the dashboard. The gas gauge hovered just above empty, maybe enough for the morning if they were lucky, maybe not. In the back seat, Lily was curled up under a nest of blankets, her stuffed bear tucked tight beneath her chin. Her breathing was slow and even, her cheeks pink from the chill. Daniel had wrapped her in every spare jacket and sweater they'd had, careful to block any drafts. He reached back and gently adjusted her hood, making sure no strand of hair was left uncovered. "I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered, eyes still closed. "I'm warm." His chest tightened. "Good," he said softly, brushing a hand over her forehead. "That's all that matters." But it wasn't. Not really. Every part of him ached with the knowledge that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. She should have been in a warm bed with nightlights and bedtime stories, not crammed into the back seat of a freezing car, listening to the wind howl outside. Daniel pulled his coat tighter and leaned his head against the steering wheel. The ache in his lower back throbbed from hours of packing and driving. He hadn't eaten since early that morning, but hunger felt distant compared to everything else. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed, low and mournful. A few cars passed on the road beyond the lot, their headlights sweeping across the frost-covered windshield before disappearing again. No one looked twice at the old sedan parked beneath the flickering lamp. Daniel sat there for a while, listening to the soft rhythm of Lily's breathing. The night was bitter and long, but inside the car, where a father kept watch and a daughter dreamed safely, there was something else too. It wasn't much, but it was love, and tonight, that would have to be enough. The pale morning light broke slowly across the supermarket lot, chasing the frost from the edges of the windshield. Daniel shifted in the driver's seat, his neck stiff from sleeping upright, arms crossed tight against the chill. The engine had been off for hours now. He couldn't afford to run the heat all night, but Lily had stayed warm, cocooned in blankets and the quiet hum of her dreams. He blinked the sleep from his eyes, rubbed his hands together for warmth, and stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap, sharp, immediate. He exhaled into his palms, watching the fog of his breath curl in the air. It was barely past 6. The lot was still empty, just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of wind against trash cans. He checked on Lily through the window, still asleep, peaceful. That's when he heard it, the low purr of an engine. A sleek black SUV pulled into the lot, its tires crunching lightly over the gravel at the edge. It was the kind of car that didn't belong here, not in this part of town, not parked beside a rust-stained sedan packed with bags and blankets. The SUV rolled to a slow stop, not far from where Daniel stood, arms tucked into his coat sleeves. The windows were tinted, but after a few seconds, the driver's side lowered with a smooth mechanical sigh. A woman sat behind the wheel, late 20s, maybe early 30s, striking in a way that felt effortless. Dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, sharp eyes, calm but curious. She didn't look out of place in the SUV. She was the SUV, poised, polished, expensive. Her gaze moved past Daniel, landing on the rear window of his car, on Lily. Daniel straightened, a flicker of protectiveness rising in his chest. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, his tone polite but edged. The woman's eyes didn't leave the back seat. "Is she okay?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "She's fine, just sleeping." A pause. The woman's gaze shifted back to him, softer now. "You've been here all night?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The woman nodded slowly, like she understood more than she let on. Then she rolled the window up and sat there, engine running, watching in thoughtful silence as the morning continued to break. The sun had finally lifted itself over the rooftops, casting long gold beams across the cracked asphalt of the lot. The frost was beginning to melt, turning the windshield into a foggy sheet of condensation. Daniel stood with his arms crossed tightly against the chill, watching his breath hang in the air. He didn't expect the SUV to still be there, but it was. Same sleek lines, same quiet hum of an idling engine. The woman inside hadn't driven off. Instead, she seemed to be waiting, watching. Daniel shifted on his feet, unsettled by the quiet attention. He wasn't used to being noticed, not anymore. Then the window rolled down again. "Hi," the woman said, her voice calm, smooth, but not condescending. She wore no makeup, just a soft gray sweater, and the kind of face that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Yet her tone wasn't rehearsed or showy, just honest. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. Daniel squared his shoulders. "We're fine." She raised an eyebrow, a subtle, skeptical lift. Her eyes flicked to the back seat where Lily still slept, a blanket wrapped to her chin, and a fog of breath pressing softly against the window. "It's pretty cold to be fine," the woman said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're just between places. It's temporary." A beat passed between them, quiet, tense. Not quite hostile, but not open either. He could see the questions forming behind her eyes. Who were they? What had happened? Why was a father and daughter sleeping in a car in the middle of winter? But she didn't ask. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Well, I have some extra coffee," she offered, lifting a cardboard tray from the passenger seat. "And breakfast sandwiches. I bought too many." Daniel hesitated. Pride clawed at his throat. Accepting help never sat easy. Still, when she stepped out of the SUV and walked toward him, tall, composed, hands outstretched with the tray, he didn't stop her. "I'm Olivia," she said, offering the warm drink first. He took it reluctantly. "Daniel." She gave him a quiet smile. "Nice to meet you, Daniel. You and your daughter deserve better than a parking lot." Daniel didn't respond, but something in his chest shifted. For the first time in days, it wasn't just the coffee warming his hands. Daniel sat on the edge of the curb, coffee warming his hands as the morning settled in around them. Lily was still asleep, her tiny frame curled like a question mark in the back seat, unaware of the quiet conversation unfolding just steps away. Across from him, the woman, Olivia, sipped from her own cup, her posture as composed as ever, but something in her eyes flickered. Not cold, not pitying, just measured. "So," Daniel said finally, glancing at her over the rim of his cup, "you always hand out breakfast in parking lots? Or is today special?" Her lips quirked into the faintest smile. "Not usually, but I saw a little girl asleep in the back seat of a car that clearly hasn't moved all night, and—" She shrugged. "Some things you don't walk away from." Daniel nodded, unsure how to respond. Gratitude and discomfort waged war inside him. He hadn't asked for help, but here she was, giving it anyway. "I'm Olivia Hale," she added, almost like an afterthought. The name stirred something in the back of Daniel's mind, familiar but distant, like a headline he'd skimmed or a logo he'd seen on a passing billboard. Then it clicked. "As in Hale Automotive?" he asked, eyebrows rising. She gave a quiet laugh, more tired than amused. "Yes, that Olivia Hale." Daniel blinked. "So, you're a billionaire CEO giving away breakfast in a parking lot." She tilted her head. "Don't say it like that. It sounds ridiculous." He chuckled, despite himself. "Little bit." Olivia looked away then, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sun was rising behind the gas station. Her smile faded into something softer, something tinged with distance. "I wasn't always who I am now," she said, "and money doesn't stop people from losing things." Daniel didn't press. He knew that tone, the kind people used when the pain was too big to name. "I appreciate the food," he said quietly. She looked back at him, eyes steady. "You don't owe me anything." Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that she was carrying something too. Something heavy, something she hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. Maybe in their own way, they were both just trying to keep moving forward. The soft sizzle of egg and cheese wafted through the cold morning air as Daniel opened the paper wrapper, his fingers still stiff from the chill. The sandwich was warm, fresh, real, not some processed thing from a gas station shelf. He hadn't even realized how hungry he was until the first bite hit his tongue. The coffee was rich, dark, still steaming in its cup holder. Lily stirred in the back seat, her eyelids fluttering as the scent reached her nose. "Daddy," she mumbled, sitting up with a yawn. "Is that food?" Daniel turned, his heart catching at her sleepy smile. "Yeah, baby girl. We got lucky this morning." She rubbed her eyes and stretched, then reached eagerly for the wrapped sandwich he held out to her. It's warm," she said, taking a bite with the kind of joy only a child could bring to something so simple. Daniel leaned against the car, watching her, his chest tight. He didn't know how to process the kindness they'd just been shown. Olivia hadn't asked permission. She hadn't hovered or made it into a moment. She had simply handed over the tray, smiled, and said, "There's more in the bag. I didn't know what Lily might like." Then she was gone. No big farewell, no explanation, just a quiet walk back to her SUV, the engine humming to life, tires crunching against gravel as she pulled out of the lot and disappeared into traffic. Daniel stood there for a long time after, sandwich half finished in one hand, watching the place where her taillights had vanished. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the gesture itself, or how deeply it hit. People didn't usually do things like that, not without expecting something in return, but Olivia hadn't lingered. She hadn't asked for thanks. She hadn't made it feel like charity. It felt human, rare, real. He looked down at Lily, who had finished her sandwich and now leaned her head on the back of the seat, smiling up at him. "She was nice," she said. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But for the first time in a while, hope didn't feel so far out of reach. The engine coughed as Daniel pulled up to the curb outside Lily's school, the kind of rough sputter that made him instinctively glance at the dashboard, still hovering on empty. The gas would hold, maybe for another day if he was careful. But after that, there was no plan, just the quiet weight of now. Lily adjusted her backpack and reached for the door handle, pausing before she stepped out. "Will you be okay today, Daddy?" Daniel forced a smile, the kind that hurt to hold. "Of course, just going to look for some work, maybe fix a few things. I'll be right here when the bell rings." She nodded solemnly, her little face far too aware for 7 years old. Maybe today's the lucky day. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe it is. She jumped out and waved before disappearing into the stream of kids pouring through the school's front doors. The second she was gone, Daniel exhaled and leaned back in his seat, the silence swallowing him whole. He spent the next hour driving through town, stopping at every temp agency, mechanic shop, and warehouse within a 10-mile radius. His resume, what little there was of it, lived in the glove compartment, printed on paper that had been folded too many times. He walked into offices with a polite smile, filled out forms with aching fingers, and left his number over and over, always with the same hopeful phrase, "Willing to start immediately." Each time the answers came back soft but firm. "We're not hiring right now. We'll let you know if anything opens up. It's slow this season." He thanked them anyway and moved on, the words stacking on top of each other until they started to sound like echoes in a canyon. By noon, he was back in the car, eating crackers from a plastic bag and watching people rush in and out of restaurants he couldn't afford. His phone buzzed once, an automated message about a job lead that required certifications he didn't have. He deleted it without reading the rest. Responsibility pressed on him like gravity: rent, food, fuel, Lily's school supplies. Every dollar had a job, and he was running out of both. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, eyes closed. Maybe tomorrow would be the lucky day, but right now, reality was heavier than hope. The last light of day faded into a pale orange haze as Daniel pulled back into the supermarket lot, gravel crunching beneath his tires. The cold had crept in again, sharper now, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. He parked in the same corner as before, tucked beneath the flickering street lamp. Routine, he thought bitterly. They'd only been out here 2 nights, and it was already becoming routine. Lily was quiet in the back seat, hugging her stuffed fox. She'd colored a picture at school, a bright sun over a little house with smoke curling from the chimney, and taped it to the inside of the window like it might bring warmth. Daniel hadn't said much during pickup. He didn't have the heart. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, just one moment of stillness. He was about to reach for the glove box when a shadow moved beside the car. His eyes snapped open. A knock. He turned, heart tightening, ready to apologize, explain, defend, whatever it took. But it wasn't a cop. It was Olivia. She stood beside the driver's window, arms wrapped around herself in a long slate-gray coat. Her breath curled visibly in the cold, but her expression was calm, measured. And this time she wasn't holding coffee. Daniel rolled down the window halfway. "Didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to come back," she said. "But I kept thinking about you two, about how wrong it feels that you're still out here." He didn't respond. What could he say? "I have a guest house," she continued, voice steady. "It's empty, clean, quiet. It's got heat, hot water, and space for Lily to sleep in a real bed." Daniel gripped the steering wheel, jaw tight. "Why?" "Because you helped her feel safe. Because no one should have to sleep in a car in winter. And because I can." He looked back at Lily, who was watching Olivia through the glass, wide-eyed and hopeful. "Just one night," Olivia added. "No strings." Daniel hesitated, then nodded once. And just like that, the night changed, not because of luck, but because someone refused to look away. Daniel followed Olivia's SUV in silence, headlights bouncing along the winding road just outside town. The farther they drove, the more the world seemed to shift. City lights giving way to quiet hills, cracked pavement traded for smooth asphalt. Lily sat up straighter in the back seat, her nose nearly pressed to the glass as they passed long iron gates and rows of trees strung with soft, glowing lights. "Daddy," she whispered, eyes wide, "is this a castle?" Daniel gave a tired smile. "Feels like one, doesn't it?" When they reached the end of the driveway, the SUV curved around a grand circular path and stopped near a wide estate house, its stone walls bathed in warm light. But Olivia didn't lead them toward the main doors. Instead, she parked off to the side, where a cobblestone path wound its way toward a smaller building nestled beneath tall oaks. "This way," she said as she stepped out, her voice low against the quiet of night. Daniel and Lily followed her to the guest house, a charming cottage with white trim, a small porch, and flower beds now tucked in for winter. It was modest compared to the mansion behind them, but to Daniel it looked like something from a different life. Inside, the air was warm, softly scented with cedar, and something sweet like cinnamon. A lamp glowed on a small wooden table beside a plush couch. The open layout revealed a kitchenette, a bathroom through a short hallway, and a bedroom with 2 beds, both made, with thick quilts folded neatly at the foot. "It's not much," Olivia said, her tone deliberately casual, "but it's clean and stocked. You'll find food in the fridge, fresh towels, and a space heater if the cold creeps in." Lily rushed toward the beds, her backpack swinging as she climbed onto one. "Can I sleep here, Daddy? It's so soft." Daniel watched her for a beat, then turned to Olivia. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." She gave a small nod, then stepped back toward the door. Just for the night. Stay as long as you need, Daniel. No pressure, no questions." And then she was gone, leaving the quiet hum of peace behind her, for the first time in a long time. From the second-story window of the main house, Olivia stood with her arms folded loosely across her chest, the cool glass of her wine untouched on the table behind her. Outside, beyond the curve of the stone path and the low garden walls, the guest house glowed with warm light. Through the window pane, she could just make out their shadows. Daniel moving around the small kitchen, Lily dancing in her socks across the hardwood floor with the carefree energy only children possessed. She hadn't meant to look. Not really. But something about them tugged at her. The way Lily threw her arms around her father's waist mid-step, the way Daniel bent down, unbothered by exhaustion, just to lift her into his arms and spin her once, laughter spilling through the glass, even if the sound didn't quite reach her. It was the kind of bond that didn't need words. Pure, unfiltered. It caught Olivia off guard. She turned away from the window, pressing her palm to her mouth as if to hide the ache rising in her throat. It had been years since she'd seen anything like that, since she'd felt anything like that. Elliot would have been 10 now. The thought came uninvited, as it always did. Sharp, unwelcome, but inevitable. Her chest tightened, and she blinked against the sting in her eyes. She never talked about him, not to her board, not to the press, not even to the people who claimed to be close. They didn't ask anymore. Grief made people uncomfortable, especially when it lingered. But watching Daniel and Lily felt like looking through a window, not just into their lives, but into her own past, into what might have been. The bedtime stories, the midnight snack runs, the giggles echoing off hallway walls, all the things that money could never replace once they were gone. She leaned against the window frame, her reflection faint in the glass. For a woman who had everything, Olivia suddenly felt hollow in the quiet. Still, she watched them a moment longer, not out of pity, but because for the first time in years, something in her stirred. Not sorrow, not envy. Something gentler, something like hope. The next morning brought the smell of fresh coffee and a quiet sense of clarity that Daniel hadn't felt in weeks. The guest house was still and warm, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains and painting soft patterns on the wooden floor. Lily was curled up beneath a quilt, still dreaming, her stuffed fox tucked tight against her chest. For the first time in days, she hadn't woken up cold. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter, coffee mug in hand, staring out the small window at the sprawling estate beyond. Every inch of it looked manicured, pristine, yet real. The kind of place where people were supposed to feel safe. It was more than a roof. It was too much. And he knew he couldn't stay without giving something back. By mid-morning, he made his way up to the main house, boots crunching lightly over the gravel path. He wasn't used to knocking on grand front doors, but he did. 3 times, firm and clear. Olivia answered, her expression unreadable but not cold. "I want to work," Daniel said without preamble. "I'm grateful for the guest house, more than I can say, but I can't just take something I haven't earned." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside and motioned him in. The interior of the house was just as elegant as he imagined. High ceilings, warm wood accents, walls lined with books and art. But it didn't feel showy. It felt lived in, like someone had built a life here, not just a facade. In the kitchen, Olivia handed him a folder. Inside were documents, property maintenance schedules, vehicle logs, landscaping invoices. "You've worked on engines, right?" she asked. 15 years, Daniel replied, flipping through the pages. "And I've done landscaping, drywall, plumbing, whatever's needed." "Good," she said simply. "The garage needs organizing. The grounds need trimming. And the fountain out front hasn't worked in months." He looked up, surprised. "You're serious?" She gave a small smile. "I don't make empty offers." Daniel nodded. "Then I'm all in." She didn't say thank you, and he didn't expect her to. There was a silent understanding between them. This wasn't charity. It was an agreement. And for the first time since the world had started crumbling beneath his feet, Daniel felt the ground begin to steady. By the end of the first week, Daniel's presence on the estate had gone from curious anomaly to steady rhythm. He arrived at the main garage just after sunrise each day, sleeves rolled up, tools in hand, and a quiet focus that didn't ask for permission or approval. He didn't talk much, didn't charm, didn't boast. But his work spoke louder than words ever could. Engines that had sat dormant for months came back to life under his hands. The tool bench, once cluttered and ignored, now gleamed with order. The riding mower that refused to start for the past 2 seasons, fixed before anyone remembered it needed repair. Word started to travel through the house. "Have you seen the courtyard hedges? That new guy, Daniel, shaped them like something out of a magazine," whispered one of the housekeepers as she passed through the kitchen. "He doesn't take breaks," the gardener muttered one afternoon, half impressed, half baffled. I offered him coffee twice. He just nodded and kept raking. Even Olivia noticed. From her office window she watched as Daniel replaced an entire section of fencing along the western edge of the property. No one had asked him to. He'd simply noticed it was rotting, measured the panels, salvaged wood from the storage shed, and rebuilt it, clean, straight, solid. When she approached him later that evening, he was still out there, hammer in hand, sweat dampening the collar of his shirt despite the cool breeze. "You could have told someone," she said. He looked up, brushing a hand over his forehead. "Didn't see the point in waiting." Olivia said nothing, just nodded once. But the corner of her mouth lifted. Daniel didn't need praise. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just was. Reliable, steady, honest, a man who kept his promises even when no one was watching. That evening, as Lily helped set the table in the guest house, and Daniel rinsed the dirt from his hands, there was a lightness in the air. Not comfort, not yet, but something close. A rhythm settling in. A sense that perhaps they belonged, not just on the estate, but in someone's trust. The rain came softly that evening, tapping against the windows in gentle rhythms that filled the silence Olivia had grown so used to. She sat in her study, legs tucked beneath her, on the wide leather armchair, the fireplace throwing flickering shadows across the floor. The house was quiet, too quiet. Always had been, ever since the echoes of laughter stopped living in its walls. She stared at her reflection in the tall glass of the cabinet across the room. In the dim light, it was a faint silhouette, sharp lines, poised posture, the image of a woman who had it all. But Olivia knew better. She knew what sat behind the crisp tailoring, the practiced calm, the success that others mistook for strength. A folder lay open on her lap, nothing urgent, just quarterly reports, acquisitions, logistics. Easy things, controllable things. Numbers didn't lie and they didn't leave. People did. Her eyes drifted to the framed photo on the shelf. It was slightly crooked, a small detail that only she ever noticed. In it, Olivia stood beside a man with a politician's smile, arms wrapped around her waist. Marcus Hale, her ex-husband, her greatest miscalculation. The marriage had lasted 3 years. The fallout, far longer. He had loved the image of her, the name, the power, the money, but not her. Not the woman who still cried silently when she passed a baby aisle. Not the woman who hadn't forgiven herself for losing the one thing that ever made her feel real. Elliot. She whispered the name sometimes just to hear it in the air again. Her son, her boy, who never came home from the hospital. Congenital heart defect, the doctors had said. Rare, tragic, unpreventable. But none of that mattered. Not to a mother who had planned his nursery, bought the books, folded the tiny socks. Grief had taken root in her like ice, slow, invisible, and deep. She'd built her empire afterward, pushed harder, worked longer, smiled less. It was easier to keep people at arm's length than risk watching them disappear. Until now. Until a little girl's laughter floated in from across the lawn. Until a man showed up, not asking for help, not offering flattery, just existing, with quiet strength and honest hands. Olivia closed the folder and leaned back in her chair, listening to the rain and the memory of what she used to feel. Maybe, just maybe, the ice was starting to melt. The guest house glowed like a lantern against the darkened estate grounds, its soft yellow light spilling through the windows and onto the damp patio stones. Olivia stood just beyond the glow, arms folded lightly across her chest, a shawl draped over her shoulders as the cool night breeze kissed her skin. She hadn't meant to linger, just to walk, to clear her head, but something had drawn her here. Through the parted curtains, she could see them. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, a worn hardcover open in his lap. Lily was curled beneath the quilt, her hair fanned across the pillow, her eyes wide with sleepy wonder. Her fingers clutched her stuffed fox, but it was her father's voice that held her still, calm and safe. "And so the little mouse tiptoed into the forest," Daniel read, his voice low and steady, not knowing that something magical was waiting just beyond the trees. Lily gasped softly, and Daniel smiled without looking up from the page. He turned it slowly, letting the silence stretch just enough to let her imagination fill in the gaps. Olivia found herself leaning slightly closer to the window, almost without realizing. There was no performance in Daniel's voice, no dramatics, just a man, a father, anchoring his child in a world where bedtime stories still mattered. It was such a small thing, reading a book. But the way Lily clung to every word, the way Daniel tucked the quilt tighter around her shoulders, spoke volumes about the life they'd built together, even in hardship. A lump formed in Olivia's throat. This wasn't the kind of love that came with grand gestures or polished perfection. It was quieter, stronger, built in whispered pages and gentle hands brushing hair from a little girl's face. She stepped back into the shadows as Daniel closed the book and kissed Lily's forehead. The light inside dimmed, and soon the only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees. Olivia stood there a moment longer, then turned back toward the house, her heart heavier, but in a different way. Not weighed down, full. The sun dipped low behind the trees as a golden hush settled over the estate. Inside the guest house, Daniel straightened the collar of his shirt, one of the few he owned that wasn't work-stained or frayed. He glanced at Lily, who twirled in front of the mirror, her sundress swaying like petals in the breeze. "Do I look okay?" she asked, eyes wide. "You look perfect," he said, meaning it. A soft knock came at the door. Olivia stood there, elegant in a deep green blouse and simple slacks, her hair pinned back like always, but somehow softer tonight. "Dinner's ready," she said with a smile. "Come on in." The main house felt different at night, warmer. The lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, casting long shadows along the wood floors. The dining room table had been set for three, real china, linen napkins, candles flickering between bowls of roasted vegetables, and steaming platters of food that smelled like memory, garlic, rosemary, and something sweet baking in the oven. Daniel hesitated at the threshold, unsure of where to sit, unsure of everything. But Lily dashed forward with all the confidence in the world, climbing onto the chair Olivia had pulled out for her. "I like your house," she announced brightly. Olivia laughed. "Thank you, Lily. I'm glad you're here." The beginning was stiff, conversation clipped, Daniel too aware of his sleeves, Olivia too polite. But then Lily dropped her fork trying to stab a cherry tomato, and they all burst out laughing. And just like that, something cracked open. They talked about books, favorite meals, and Lily's dream of becoming a veterinarian astronaut who also paints. Olivia surprised them both with her dry sense of humor and the quiet way she listened, really listened. Daniel found himself relaxing, a little at a time. By dessert, homemade peach cobbler, they were talking like old friends. "You cook too?" Daniel asked, amazed. Olivia shrugged, smiling. "Sometimes. It helps me think." As the night wound down, Lily fought to keep her eyes open at the table, her head eventually landing on Daniel's shoulder. He looked at Olivia. "Thank you for all of this." She met his gaze, her voice softer now. "You're welcome. It was nice not eating alone." For once the house didn't feel so big, and the silence didn't feel quite so empty. The next morning broke with the smell of dew and motor oil, something that, oddly enough, brought Daniel a strange sense of peace. He was back in the estate's garage early, sleeves rolled up, hands already dark with grease, as he examined the undercarriage of an old Jaguar that hadn't run in years. The place was quiet, just the steady creak of the mechanic's stool and the occasional chirp of birds nesting along the rafters. Daniel had never worked in a garage this clean. Every tool had a place, every cabinet was labeled, and yet half the cars inside sat untouched, their engines cold from neglect. Olivia had the collection of someone who appreciated beauty, but maybe didn't always have time to enjoy it. By late morning, he'd made progress on 2 classics and was halfway through organizing the parts inventory when he heard footsteps behind him. "You made that Jag purr," Olivia said, stepping lightly into the space. She wore jeans today, dark, fitted, paired with boots that looked too expensive for a garage, but she moved like she belonged there. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. She just needed someone to care. Half these cars just want a little attention. Olivia nodded, walking past him to run a hand along the hood of a cherry-red convertible. "I've had this one for 3 years. Never trusted anyone to touch it." He raised an eyebrow. "You're trusting me?" "I already am." She turned to face him fully then, expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking, this estate is too big to manage piece by piece. Between the vehicles, the maintenance, and the grounds, someone needs to keep it all running, and you're already doing it." Daniel tensed slightly. "I'm not looking for charity." "This isn't charity," she replied evenly. "It's a job offer. Full-time, salary, benefits, a stable place for you and Lily, for as long as you want it." He was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling slowly over him. After everything, after sleeping in his car, after scraping by, after pretending not to need help, it felt like breathing for the first time in months. "You're sure?" he asked. "I don't offer what I don't mean." Daniel looked down at the wrench still in his hand, then back up at her. "Then I'm in." And just like that, something changed. Not just work, not just housing, but the shape of his future. The guest house buzzed with a different kind of energy that evening. Scissors snipping, glue drying in clumps, cardboard scraps littering the floor. Lily sat cross-legged at the small table, tongue slightly out in concentration, as she carefully glued a plastic tree into the corner of a shoebox. "It's the Amazon rainforest," she declared proudly, holding up a Jaguar cutout for Daniel to admire, "but I think it needs more sparkle." Daniel chuckled from the stove, where he was half-focused on boiling spaghetti. "I'm not sure the real rainforest had glitter, kiddo." "But mine does," Lily said with a grin. She reached for the glitter jar, just as the front door swung open with a soft creak. Olivia stepped inside, hesitant at first, holding a stack of books in one arm and a curious smile on her lips. "I knocked," she said, "but I think glue and creativity make people temporarily deaf." Daniel turned, surprised. "Everything okay?" Olivia nodded, glancing at the chaos of craft supplies. "Lily mentioned at dinner yesterday that she had a school project due Friday. I thought she might need some extras. I brought rainforest reference books, and maybe a few miniature animals I picked up this afternoon." Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. "You got animals?" Olivia knelt beside her, setting down the supplies. Tiny frogs, a sloth, and one very determined-looking toucan. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching the two of them with something like awe. Olivia, usually so poised and polished, was now sitting on the floor, hair falling from its clip, listening patiently as Lily explained every corner of her rainforest scene. They added a waterfall using aluminum foil and blue tissue paper. Olivia cut vines from green string, while Daniel helped rig a tiny pulley system to make the Jaguar jump between trees. Laughter echoed in the small space, unforced and easy, filling the cracks that once held silence. When the diorama was finally finished, Lily stood back, hands on her hips. "It's perfect. We're going to get an A+. "I have no doubt," Olivia said, smiling at her with real warmth. Daniel met her gaze across the table, a quiet moment stretching between them. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. She was already part of something they hadn't known they were building, together. It started at the diner. Daniel had just picked up a breakfast sandwich to go, something quick before heading back to the estate, when he noticed the way the conversation dipped the moment he stepped inside. Not loud or obvious, just a shift. Eyes that lingered too long, half smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. He didn't need to hear the words to know. Still, as he paid and turned to leave, he caught a snippet from the corner booth. "She's got a type now, huh? Stray dogs with tool belts." A quiet chuckle followed, not mean-spirited but smug. Daniel said nothing. He just walked out, hands clenched around the brown paper bag, the sandwich already cooling inside. He'd grown used to judgment over the years, single dad, grease under his nails. But this was different. This was about Olivia. By noon, it had spread to the hardware store, the gas station, even the school pickup line. Is it true that Daniel Brooks is living up at her place? She let him move in with the kid? Guess fixing cars really can change your life. He ignored it as best he could, focused on his work. Replaced the spark plugs in the Aston Martin, repaired a broken hinge on the garden gate, but the whispers pressed in around him like smoke, clinging even when he tried to brush them off. That evening he found Olivia on the back porch, sipping tea, a thick folder of estate documents resting on her lap. She glanced up as he approached, and it was clear from her expression that she already knew. "They're talking," he said. "No need to specify who." "They always do," Olivia replied, calm, her gaze fixed on the trees beyond the property line. I don't want this to become a problem. For you." She closed the folder gently. "Daniel, I've been in boardrooms with men who tried to break me in suits 3 times the cost of their souls. A few town gossips don't scare me." He managed a small smile. "You sure? I'm not ashamed of anything happening here. Are you?" Daniel looked out toward the guest house, where Lily was dancing in the window, her arms waving like tree branches in the wind. "No," he said quietly, "not even close." Still, he wondered how long peace could last when the world always seemed ready to question what it didn't understand. The knock came just after noon, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the stillness of the guest house like a warning. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag fresh from the garage and opened the door expecting a delivery, maybe one of Olivia's staff. Instead, he found himself staring at 2 people he hadn't seen in nearly 4 years. Susan and David Halpern, Lily's maternal grandparents. Daniel's chest tightened instantly, the air going cold despite the spring sun overhead. Susan stood stiffly in a cream blouse, arms folded across her chest, while David's posture was as rigid as Daniel remembered, shoulders back, chin up, like he was still giving some kind of lecture. "Daniel," Susan said, cool and clipped, "we heard quite a story." "Good to see you, too," Daniel replied, his voice flat. David didn't waste time. "You're living in a billionaire's guest house now? With our granddaughter?" "She's my daughter," Daniel said sharply. "Rachel's daughter," Susan corrected, eyes narrowing. "And she deserves stability, not whatever this is." Daniel stepped outside and closed the door behind him, shielding Lily from the voices rising just under the surface. "You have no idea what this is," he said. "You haven't reached out in years. Not a single birthday card. Not a call." "We gave you space after Rachel died," Susan snapped. "You made it clear you didn't want help. I didn't want strings. I still don't." David glanced toward the estate grounds, the main house visible in the distance. "So what is this, then? Are you her employee or her project?" Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "I work here. I provide for Lily. She's safe. She's happy. And that's more than you ever bothered to ask. Susan's face softened just a fraction. We're not trying to start a war. We just want to be involved. Daniel's voice lowered. Then be involved. Come to her school plays. Call her. Know what she loves. But don't come here questioning my parenting because I finally found something good. They didn't respond. They didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Eyes were watching, and not everyone liked what they saw. As they turned and walked back to their rental car, Daniel stood still on the porch, pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't fear many things, but the thought of anyone taking Lily away? That fear lived in his bones. The envelope was thick, official, the kind of thing that made your stomach drop before you even opened it. Daniel found it tucked between the guest house screen door and the frame when he came back from Lily's school pickup. At first he thought it was just another estate memo, or maybe school forms. But the return address said otherwise. Halpern, Whitman and Green, LLP. He tore it open on instinct, hands already shaking, eyes scanning the bold type. Petition for custody review. The air seemed to vanish from his lungs. Inside the house, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, humming to herself as she worked on a drawing, crayons scattered around her like confetti. Daniel sank into the chair at the kitchen table, papers spread out, like they might reorganize themselves into something less terrifying. The language was clean, clinical. Concerns over the child's long-term stability. Unconventional living arrangements. Suitability of parental guardianship. Words dressed up to look neutral, but they cut like knives. They didn't say it outright, but Daniel could feel the implication seeping from every line. You don't belong here. You never did. He didn't hear Olivia come in. I saw your car, she said gently. You looked pale from the driveway. He tried to slide the papers aside, but she saw enough. Daniel, she said, her voice low. What is it? He handed her the envelope, jaw clenched, throat dry. She read quickly, expression sharpening with each page. They're going after custody, she said, almost to herself. They think because I'm living here, it's unstable, like I'm taking handouts instead of trying to survive. She looked up at him. You're not taking handouts. I know that, he said more harshly than he meant. But to them it's a story. Mechanic moves into billionaire's house. Must be unfit. She set the papers down with care. My legal team is the best in the state. Let me call them. They'll shut this down before it starts. He hesitated. I appreciate it, but I don't know if I should be leaning on you like that. This is my fight. Olivia didn't flinch. It may be your fight, Daniel, but you're not in it alone. Not anymore. He looked toward the hallway where Lily's laughter echoed faintly, and he knew, no matter how much pride he held, he couldn't risk losing her. Not for anything. The lights shimmered like stars caught in chandeliers. High ceilings, polished marble, champagne flutes balanced in delicate fingers. It was a world Daniel had only ever seen in passing, through magazine pages left behind in waiting rooms or glimpses on hotel lobby TVs. And yet here he was, standing just inside the ballroom of the Hawthorne Hotel, the weight of a rented tux pressing against his collar, feeling like a man who had wandered into the wrong life. Across the room, Olivia Hale moved with effortless grace. Her dress, midnight blue, elegant, understated, flowed with every step. People gravitated toward her, smiled at her, angled themselves to be noticed. She gave just enough of herself to each interaction to be polite, but Daniel could see it in her eyes. She wasn't in it. Not really. She never was. He adjusted his tie and caught sight of himself in a mirrored column. He looked wrong here. Too broad-shouldered, too rough around the edges. Hands built for engines and bolts, not handshakes and flutes of rosé. Then Olivia spotted him. She excused herself from a small group of donors and crossed the floor toward him, her expression softening in a way it never did with anyone else. "You clean up well," she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I'm just trying not to trip," Daniel replied, tugging at his collar. "I think this tie is cutting off circulation to my brain." She laughed, a real one, and slipped her arm into his. "Don't worry. You've already survived worse than a ballroom." The evening unfolded slowly. Speeches, small talk, silent auction paddles raised in flickers of wealth. Daniel didn't know the language of luxury, but he knew people. He watched the way some eyes lingered on him, the whispers not even veiled. That's him, the mechanic, the one living with her. But Olivia never wavered. She introduced him without apology, without hesitation. "This is Daniel Brooks," she said simply. "A friend, and someone I trust." And when they stood side by side beneath the golden lights, even in a room full of money and power, Daniel didn't shrink. He stood tall, because beside Olivia, he didn't feel like the outsider anymore. He felt seen. The champagne had lost its sparkle by the time the evening reached its peak. Laughter rang through the ballroom, hollow and practiced, echoing against gilded ceilings and clinking glass. Daniel stood near one of the tall cocktail tables, a fresh drink in hand he hadn't touched, watching the crowd move like a polished machine. He could feel it, eyes on him. Not curious, not kind, the kind of glances people gave when they thought they were too polite to be obvious. Old money had a particular way of measuring a man, not by merit, by lineage, by polish, by pedigree. And Daniel, no matter how crisply he stood or how tightly he tied his bow tie, would never be one of them. From across the room, Olivia was caught in conversation with a man Daniel hadn't seen before. Tall, sharply dressed in a slate-gray tux, with a presence that demanded attention. His confidence wasn't showy. It was the sort built from years of being told yes. Daniel watched as the man leaned in a little too close, smiling like he knew a secret. His hand resting on Olivia's arm just long enough to mean something. She stiffened. Daniel set down his glass and made his way over, his steps calm but purposeful. "Daniel Brooks," Olivia said when he reached her side. Her voice was steady, but her eyes warned him of something deeper. "This is Charles Whitaker. We used to work together." Charles smiled, all teeth. "I've read about you," he said, extending a hand Daniel didn't take. "Quite the story, from engine grease to the guest house. Must be one hell of a ride." Daniel said nothing, his jaw tight. "I have to admit," Charles continued, sipping his drink, "I didn't think Olivia was the sentimental type, but I suppose we all have our little indulgences." Olivia's voice cut like glass. "That's enough, Charles." He chuckled, unfazed. "Of course, I forget myself." Charles stepped away, fading into the crowd with the smug ease of someone who'd always gotten away with things. Olivia exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "He's harmless, just petty." Daniel looked after the man, then back to her. "He's not harmless. He's exactly the kind of man who thinks people like me don't belong here." Olivia met his gaze, unflinching. "Then let's prove him wrong." And in that moment, they weren't just standing in a ballroom. They were standing together. Against old names, against quiet judgment, against the weight of everything unspoken. The house had long since gone quiet. The guests, the laughter, the music, all gone, fading into the hush of midnight. Only the soft ticking of the antique clock in the hall and the occasional creak of old wood remained. Olivia sat curled on the leather couch in the study, barefoot, her evening gown exchanged for a worn sweater and leggings. A fire flickered low in the hearth, casting shadows that danced across the bookshelves and walls, lined with photographs she never talked about. Daniel entered quietly, 2 mugs of tea in hand. He offered her one without a word, then sank into the armchair across from her, his tux now replaced with jeans and a plain shirt. The stiffness of the night had worn off. All that was left now was what lingered underneath. "Thanks," she murmured, wrapping her hands around the mug. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled, until Olivia set her cup down and stared into the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. I used to have a brother. His name was Jacob." Daniel looked up. She wasn't meeting his gaze, just watching the flames like they might speak for her. "He was 4 years younger," she continued. "Smart, loud, always had dirt on his face and a joke in his pocket. He hated all of this." She motioned vaguely to the room, to the house, to the world it represented. "He used to say money made people forget how to be human." "What happened?" Daniel asked softly. Her jaw tightened. "Car accident. He was 19, out late with friends. I was supposed to pick him up that night, but I got caught on a conference call. Told him to take a cab. He never made it." The silence that followed was heavier than before. "I threw myself into work after that," she said. "Built the company faster than anyone thought I could. People thought it was ambition. It was guilt." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You can't carry that forever, Olivia." She looked at him then, really looked. No mask, no armor, just pain, honest and raw. "I don't know how to put it down." "You don't have to," he said gently. "But you don't have to carry it alone either." And in the quiet that followed, something shifted between them. No longer just trust, but understanding. The kind that only came when both people had bled a little in the dark. It started with silence. Lily usually bounded out of school like the wind itself, backpack swinging, arms wide, her words tumbling over each other as she raced to tell Daniel about her day. But this time, when the bell rang and the kids poured out of the building, she walked slowly, head down, shoulders tight, her spark dulled. Daniel noticed instantly. "Hey, kiddo," he said, kneeling beside her as she reached the car. "Rough day?" She hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "It was fine." He frowned. "Lily," her eyes welled up before she could stop them. "It's just, some of the kids were saying stuff." Daniel's chest tightened. "What kind of stuff?" She bit her lip, twisting the strap of her backpack. "That we don't really live here, that we're just guests, and that Olivia's only being nice because she feels sorry for us." Daniel's jaw clenched. "They said we don't belong, that I'm not like them. One girl said her mom told her I was living off a rich lady's pity." Lily blinked hard, embarrassed. "Am I, Daddy? Are we just taking stuff?" He drew her into a hug, wrapping his arms around her small frame. "No, baby, we're not taking anything. We're working. We're helping. We belong just as much as anyone else." She nodded into his chest, but he could feel the way her little body stayed tense, like the words had carved deeper than she wanted to admit. Later that evening, Daniel told Olivia. He didn't sugarcoat it, just laid it out plain. Her face didn't change much, but something cold moved behind her eyes. "Whose daughter?" she asked. "I'm not saying names, that's not the point." Olivia stood, pacing slowly, the weight of reputation and memory pressing on her shoulders. "This world, it's polite on the surface and cruel underneath. I thought bringing you here would keep her safe." Daniel met her gaze. "You did, but the world gets in through cracks, and we're going to teach Lily how to stand taller than it." "She shouldn't have to." "No," Daniel agreed, "but she will because we'll show her how." They didn't need to fight the world for Lily. They just needed to teach her she was strong enough to face it, and loved enough to never face it alone. The next morning, Daniel walked Lily to school himself. He didn't say much on the drive over, just kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently resting on Lily's backpack in the seat beside him. She watched the road with wide, uncertain eyes, her fingers curling around the frayed strap like it might keep her grounded. When they pulled into the parking lot, Daniel cut the engine and turned to face her. "Listen," he said, his voice calm but firm. "There are always going to be people who think money makes them better. Louder. Right." Lily looked down. "They said we're not like them." Daniel crouched beside her in the back seat, lifting her chin so she'd meet his eyes. "We're not like them, and that's not a bad thing." She blinked. "But they were mean." "They were," he agreed. "And when people act like that, it says more about them than it ever will about you." She nodded slowly, but he could still see the worry behind her eyes. "Lily," he continued, voice softening. We don't fight back with shouting or insults. We fight by standing tall, being kind, and never letting someone else's smallness shrink who we are. She chewed on her lip, thinking it through. So, I just act like I'm not bothered? No, Daniel said, brushing a lock of hair from her face. You remember who you are. You're the girl who can name all the rainforest animals. The girl who made a whole diorama with string vines and a paper sloth. You're smart and strong and loved. They can't take that away from you unless you let them. For a moment she was quiet. Then she nodded, this time with more certainty. Okay. He kissed the top of her head, then walked her to the entrance. She squeezed his hand before letting go, shoulders squared a little higher than the day before. And as Daniel watched her disappear through the school doors, he felt it. Not the helplessness he'd feared, but the quiet certainty of something stronger. He couldn't shield her from every cruelty the world might throw, but he could give her the armor that mattered most: dignity, love, and the unwavering truth that she belonged. Always. The sun was setting behind the estate, casting long golden lines across the gravel drive as Daniel finished up in the garage. He wiped his hands on a rag, grease staining the fabric as he reached for his thermos. The day had been long, more landscaping than engines, but honest work always quieted his thoughts. Until he heard voices coming from the open French doors of the main house. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He was walking past, heading to the guest house, when the low hum of conversation caught his attention. Familiar names. His name. Daniel Brooks, said a voice he recognized. Connor Dempsey, Olivia's business partner. Sharp suit, sharper tongue, the kind of man who smiled with his teeth. Don't get me wrong, Connor continued. I admire your generosity, Liv, truly. But this thing with the mechanic, it's bordering on sentimental charity at best and personal entanglement at worst. Daniel froze just outside the doors, heart thudding. I'm not looking for your approval, Olivia said, her tone calm but cool. Connor chuckled. I know. You rarely do. But perception matters. You've spent years building Hale Enterprises into an empire, and now you've got the town whispering about your house guest and his kid? You're making decisions with your heart, Olivia. That's not like you. A pause. Then Olivia, softer now, maybe that's exactly the point. Connor didn't respond immediately. Then, with a snide edge, just don't confuse guilt with love. You've carried Jacob's shadow for a long time. Don't let it turn into a replacement fantasy. Daniel stepped back, the words like a slap. He didn't want to hear more. By the time he returned to the guest house, Lily was asleep, her soft breathing filling the small space like a lullaby. But Daniel stood in the dark kitchen, staring at the cold counter, heart heavy. Was that what this was to them? A fantasy? A project? A patch on Olivia's grief? He thought of her laughter during dinner, the way she looked at Lily like she was something fragile and wondrous. He thought of the nights they'd talked like old souls in a world that moved too fast. And still, the doubt lingered. Not because he believed Connor, but because deep down he feared he might be right. The sky was still ink black when Daniel zipped the last bag closed. The lamp in the guest house kitchen cast a soft glow, stretching long shadows across the floor as he moved silently through the space he and Lily had come to call home. But tonight, it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. Not after what he'd heard. He glanced toward the bedroom, where Lily lay curled beneath the quilt Olivia had picked out herself. Her stuffed fox was tucked under one arm, the diorama still proudly displayed on the dresser. She didn't know, not yet. And if he had his way, she never would. He sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. I'm sorry, kiddo, he whispered, but this was never ours to keep. The guest house, the safety, the laughter, they'd been real. But Daniel couldn't ignore the weight pressing in on him since Connor's words, sentimental charity, replacement fantasy, a man with nothing being given everything out of guilt, not love. Daniel had spent his whole life standing on his own feet. He wasn't about to let Lily's future be built on someone else's grief. He moved quickly but carefully, packing only what they needed: clothes, essentials, her drawings, the photo of Rachel they kept by the bed. He left everything else behind, the little luxuries they'd never expected and never asked for. A note sat on the kitchen table, written in Daniel's careful hand. "Olivia, thank you for everything, for more than I can say. But I think it's time Lily and I moved on. You gave us a place to rest. Now it's time I prove I can stand again. Take care of yourself. Daniel." He placed the keys beside it. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon, Daniel was easing the car down the long drive, past the oaks, past the fountain, past the house still asleep. He didn't look back. But in the rearview mirror, the estate faded into the morning mist, like a dream you're not sure you deserved. And Daniel drove on, heart heavy, his daughter still asleep in the back seat, unaware that everything had just changed again. The morning began like any other. Quiet, still, soft light seeping through gauzy curtains. Olivia stretched slowly, her body aching with the weight of a restless sleep. The sun was just rising, casting a pale glow across the estate lawn outside her window. Birds chirped lazily from the trees. Everything seemed normal. Until she noticed the silence, not the kind of peaceful stillness she'd come to enjoy, but an absence, a missing rhythm. No laughter from the guest house, no sound of Lily's feet thumping across the porch, no warm hum of Daniel working in the garage before sunrise. Just emptiness, a cold seed of dread rooted in her chest. She moved quickly, not bothering with shoes or a coat, as she crossed the stone path barefoot, the morning dew soaking into her skin. The guest house door was unlocked. She pushed it open. The air inside was still warm, but the life had been drained from it. The beds were made, the couch cushions fluffed. The small kitchen gleamed like it hadn't been used. Olivia's eyes landed on the note on the table, resting beside the keys she'd given him weeks ago. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. "Thank you for everything, for more than I can say." She read it twice, then again. The last line stuck in her chest like a thorn. "Now it's time I prove I can stand again." Her breath caught. The tears surprised her, quick, hot, unwanted. She pressed her fingers to her lips, willing herself to stay still, to keep control. But it was too late. The ache she'd kept buried for years opened wide again, only this time it wasn't just about what she'd lost. It was about what she'd found and let slip away. Daniel hadn't just filled a space in her home, he'd filled something in her. The quiet evenings, the shared silences, Lily's laughter echoing down the garden path, the way the house had begun to feel like a home again. She hadn't realized how much it meant until it was gone. Not guilt, not charity, love. For the first time in years, Olivia Hale felt something stronger than grief. She felt the unmistakable absence of a missing piece, and she knew exactly where it belonged. The motel sign buzzed weakly against the overcast sky, a flickering red vacancy barely holding on to its glow. Olivia sat in her car across the street, fingers clenched tightly around the steering wheel. The lot was nearly empty. Just a couple of rusted pickups, a dented SUV, and his car, parked crooked beneath a dying maple tree. She stared at it for a long time, heart pounding harder than she cared to admit. This wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't strategy. This was something she couldn't rehearse or reason through. This was personal. Olivia stepped out into the wind, wrapping her coat tighter around herself as she crossed the street. Her heels crunched against the gravel as she reached the door marked Room 6. Faint voices filtered through the thin walls. Lily's laughter, a TV on low volume, Daniel's voice, soft and steady, familiar, comforting. She knocked. Silence. The door opened a moment later, and there he stood, rumpled flannel shirt, shadows under his eyes, surprise carved deep into his expression. "Olivia," Daniel said, stunned. "What are you?" "You left," she said quietly, not accusing, just raw. He stepped out, pulling the door halfway closed behind him so Lily wouldn't see. "I thought it was the right thing." "For who?" she asked, voice trembling. "For her? For me? Or just for your pride?" He didn't answer. "I read your note, Daniel," she continued, eyes shining. "And it was noble, it was strong, but it was also wrong. You don't have to prove anything, not to me." "I didn't want to be a problem," he said, looking down. "Didn't want Lily to grow up thinking her life was borrowed." "She didn't borrow anything, neither did you. You gave me something, Daniel. You and Lily filled a part of my life I'd boarded up years ago." He looked at her then, really looked, at the vulnerability etched into every word, every breath she took to stand in front of him. "I don't want a thank you," she whispered. "I want a family. I want you, both of you, if you'll still have me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a breath that seemed to unburden his entire soul, Daniel opened the door wider. "Come inside." The motel room was dim, its single lamp casting a yellow glow over the faded carpet and peeling wallpaper. Lily sat on the bed, legs swinging as she flipped through a picture book, unaware that the entire course of their lives hung in the quiet between her father and Olivia. Daniel closed the door gently behind them, his back resting against it for a beat longer than necessary. Olivia stood by the small table, arms crossed, not defensively, but like she was holding herself together. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the poised billionaire, not the woman from headlines or whispered town gossip. He saw Olivia, the one who knew how to laugh at Lily's glitter messes, who cut vines for a rainforest diorama, who sat in silence beside him when words weren't enough. The room seemed to close in around them. "You scare me," Daniel said finally, his voice low. "Not because of who you are, but because I don't know how to let someone help me without feeling like I'm losing part of myself." Olivia stepped closer. "I'm not here to take anything away from you, Daniel. I never was. I just want a chance to give something back." He glanced toward Lily, her head now resting on the pillow, eyelids fluttering with sleep. "I've fought so hard to keep her safe," he whispered, "to stand on my own, to never owe anyone more than I could repay." "And you've done that," Olivia said gently. "You've carried more than most ever could, but maybe, just maybe, it's okay to put some of that down." He ran a hand over his face, the weight of it all catching up with him. The fear, the pride, the quiet exhaustion of being everything to someone with no one else to lean on. "What if I say yes?" he asked. "What if we try, and it falls apart?" She met his eyes. "Then we face it together, like everything else." He exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about shelter, or love, or even Lily. It was about choosing to stop surviving and start living, with someone willing to hold half the weight. Daniel reached for her hand. "Then let's try," he said, and in that moment he chose not to run. He chose home.